Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you for Reason to Resist from Kalamata, Greece on September 17th, 2025. After Israel bombed Qatar on September 9th, Qatar's autocracy expressed outrage and vowed retaliation. Other Arab autocrats soon joined in the bellicose rhetoric. The most notable was the Saudi autocrat, Crown Prince bin Salman, as they call him, who vowed to make all of Saudi Arabia's prodigious resources, or capabilities, as he put it, available to Qatar in fashioning a response to Israel. At the time, some geopolitical commentators, including yours truly, expressed doubt about where all this was heading and asserted that this was sound and fury signifying nothing. Qatar, we argued, was unlikely to embark upon any meaningful retaliation against the genocidal Israeli entity. And sure enough, that appears to be exactly where all of this bellicose rhetoric is heading. Earlier this week, Qatar hosted a two-day emergency summit for the purpose of formulating a collective Arab and Muslim response to Israel's latest insane aggression. In this episode, we'll break down what happened at that summit and where we go from here. And I'll also discuss a hugely important UN report on Israel's genocide, which was published just yesterday. But before I begin, if ultimately you find this report to be useful, informative, please like the video, please share it. And if you're not already a subscriber, we strongly encourage you to become one. We began our operations as Reason to Resist about a year ago. Recently, we soared past 100,000 subscribers. Our goal was to get there before the end of 2025. And we've now reset a more ambitious target of reaching 200,000 subscribers before the end of this calendar year. You can help by becoming a subscriber if you aren't one already. So let's get into it. Let's look at the results of the emergency summit in Doha to begin. The Emergency Arab and Muslim Summit was attended by representatives of the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which together are made up of a total of 58 states. The two-day summit concluded on Monday of this week, at which point the participants put out a final lengthy communiqué, and you can see the top of the first page of that communiqué up on the screen now. And there you can see also, although the photo is rather small, you may be able to make out that these are the dignitaries, leaders, and highnesses who participated personally in the summit. With such a large gathering, it should have been clear from the outset that the potential for dramatic concrete actions being agreed upon was very low, to put it mildly. But I suspect that this was by design. The more chefs there are in the kitchen, the harder it is to make the meal. You know, amongst these 58 states spanning 4 continents, perhaps it's even 5 actually, you are undoubtedly going to be confronted by a variety of priorities, interests. Some of these states are particularly close to the genocidal Israeli regime, such as the United Arab Emirates, amongst others. Others are quite belligerent to the, with good reason, of course, to the genocidal regime. For example, the Islamic Republic of Iran and Yemen. But the sheer size and diversity of the participants made it a virtual guarantee that the lowest common denominator was going to be very low indeed. I suspect that the Qataris invited all of these states to participate because they wanted to be able to blame disunity for their failure to do anything meaningful to punish Israel for its aggression against Qatar and for its ongoing genocide. It could have adopted a different approach. It could have formed sort of the Arab and Muslim version of the so-called coalition of the willing, identified those governments, regimes, if any, in the Arab and Muslim world, apart from, I suppose, the Islamic Republic in Yemen, who are willing to take concrete, serious action against Israel for its genocidal conduct. But they didn't opt for that approach. And again, hard to imagine that they didn't foresee what the consequences of that would be. Now, the Emir of Qatar presided over the summit. The foreign leaders who attended included the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the President of Turkey, the President of Egypt, and the King of Jordan. Now, you probably won't be able to make it out in this photograph. Unfortunately, the highnesses and leaders and dignitaries are all very small in the photo because there's so many of them. But from what I can make out, in the front row, in the center, the taller figure wearing the white robe is the Emir of Qatar. And then immediately to his left is the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Immediately to his right is the diminutive King of Jordan, and he is truly diminutive in every sense of the word. And beside the King of Jordan on his right is the President of Turkey, Erdogan, and then the dictator of Egypt, al-Sisi, is on the right of Erdogan. On the left of the Emir, on the other side of the Saudi Crown Prince, who's right next to him, a good 5 persons over, as a matter of fact, you'll see, perhaps you can make out, another rather diminutive figure. Again, diminutive in pretty much every sense of the word. And that looks to me to be Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority leader. It's interesting that in a summit which was ostensibly designed to deal with the issue of the genocide being committed against the Palestinian people, that the nominal leader of the Palestinian people, at least he's the leader that these, according to these particular heads of state, was given a rather inauspicious sort of position in the final photograph taken by all the participants. One would have thought that he would be directly beside the Emir of Qatar, but instead the Emir, for some reason that's unknown to me, decided instead to put the little King of Jordan there. Now, let's take a look at what transpired, shall we? Because of the people who were in attendance and the relative size, number, and importance of the states that participated, the result was a surprisingly large nothing burger. And before I get into the details, here are the key takeaways. First, despite all the promises by Qatar of retaliation, there is no mention, not one, of military action or even threatened military action against Israel. Second, there is no mention of helping to arm the Palestinian resistance. On the contrary, the final communique endorses the New York Declaration, which calls on the Palestinian resistance to disarm. And I'm going to return to that subject a little later in this episode. Third, the final communique of the summit does not announce a single economic sanction against Israel. Much to the embarrassment of these persons, assuming that they have any sense of honor, otherwise why would they be embarrassed? This communique does not even announce meaningful diplomatic action, such as the expulsion of Israeli diplomats from those participating states that have diplomatic relations with Israel, such as the UAE. I actually was overly generous, it turns out, in my prediction when I said that they would not take meaningful action against Israel, these states, and particularly the Qatari regime. I speculated that perhaps they would expel Israeli diplomats from the Gulf, not just from Qatar itself, but from all the Gulf states, as a cosmetic measure to satisfy their people that, in fact, they do value the dignity and honor of their citizens and the sovereignty of their countries. But not even that much emerges from this summit, at least not up until this point in time, and there's no indication in the final communique that there's going to be serious diplomatic repercussions for Israel. So now let's get into the details of this communique. The final communique of the Arab Muslim Summit is relatively long. It consists of about 2,700 words, of which 8 are preambular paragraphs and 25 are operative paragraphs, each of which is characterized in the communique as a decision. Sounds important, doesn't it? So the participating states claim in this communique to have made 25 decisions at the summit. But when you read the operative paragraphs carefully, it becomes clear rather quickly that most of the so-called decisions are merely condemnations, and most of those condemnations are repetitions of past condemnations by these same governments which have not backed them up for the most part with any meaningful action against the genocidal Israeli entity. The summit's final communique uses the words condemn or condemnation no less than 8 times. The final communique does recognize at the outset, in the very first decision, that Israel is committing genocide, but that's not particularly new for most of these governments. Even the Saudi autocrat said a long time ago, months ago, that Israel is committing genocide. But the acknowledgement raises a question. Having acknowledged that Israel is committing genocide, what concrete actions did these 58 states agree to take against the crime of crime and the criminal of criminals in international relations today? The answer, none, zero, rien, nada. Now, I'd like to take you to a couple of paragraphs that I found particularly interesting. I've just put up on the screen paragraph 3 of the final communique. I'll read it for you in case it's too small for you to read. It states that the participating states, quote, reaffirm absolute solidarity with the state of Qatar against this aggression, which constitutes aggression against all Arab and Islamic states, and to stand firmly with Qatar in all measures it may take in response to this treacherous Israeli aggression to safeguard its security, sovereignty, stability, and the safety of its citizens and residents in accordance with the UN Charter. And by the way, since we're on the subject of the UN Charter, this attack by Israel undoubtedly constituted an act of aggression under the Charter. It was an act of war, and a military response would have been entirely lawful and appropriate under the circumstances. And, you know, for those of us who have observed closely Israel's behavior over decades, it not only was appropriate and lawful to retaliate militarily, but undeniably necessary, because as Israel likes to say falsely of all of its adversaries, Israel only understands one language, and that is the language of force. Now, what I found particularly interesting about this paragraph 3 is that the Arab and Muslim governments, regimes that were represented here, said that this attack on Qatar constitutes an aggression against all Arab and Islamic states. Well, having acknowledged that, one would think that every single one of them would be taking very serious action to counter the aggression and to ensure that Israel doesn't repeat this act of aggression against any of the member states of the Arab League or the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. But having set the bar high, they went in very low. And the other thing I found rather, shall we say, slimy about this paragraph, they say they're going to stand firmly with Qatar in all measures it may take in response to this treacherous Israeli aggression. So they're implicitly placing the onus upon Qatar to take actions which they will then support. But they know perfectly well that Qatar, both because of its history, its relationship with the United States, it's being the host of the largest US military base in the region, its vulnerability, its tiny population, Qatar itself is not going to take the lead in any kind of military action or economic response. And so they agreed to allow Qatar to take the lead and to follow because they knew that Qatar was not really going to go anywhere with its bellicose language. Now, paragraph 6 of this final communique, in my view, highlights just how subservient these regimes are to Washington. And I'm putting it up on the screen here. Again, just in case it isn't large enough for you to read, I'm going to read it out for you. The paragraph declares that the participating states support the efforts of states engaged in mediation, in particular the state of Qatar, the Arab Republic of Egypt, and the United States of America, to end the aggression on the Gaza Strip, and in this context, to reaffirm the constructive role played by Qatar and its valued mediation efforts, blah, blah, blah. The language here, which frankly I find appalling, is the assertion, the explicit assertion that the United States government is making genuine efforts to mediate an end to the genocide in Gaza and to stop the aggression on the Gaza Strip. That's what they're saying here. They're making the claim with a straight face that the United States of America, which is providing the weapons that Israel is using to destroy the Palestinian people, providing the intelligence, providing the diplomatic cover, the legal protection at the United Nations Security Council, for example, by vetoing resolutions which would have obliged Israel to put a stop to the carnage. The United States, which is providing all this economic aid to Israel at a time of desperate need because its economy is taking a huge hit due to its relentless warmongering and aggressions. The United States, which undoubtedly knew that Israel was going to attack Qatar. It could not have not known because of all of the military bases, air defense systems, radars, intelligence satellites it has in or above the region, and quite probably not only knew in advance and approved the strike on Qatar, but actually facilitated it by, for example, providing refueling aircraft and by strong-arming the governments of the countries over which the Israeli warplanes flew into allowing it to happen. So it is really beyond the pale that these 58 governments that are supposed to be representative of the Arabs and Muslims of this world, that they would falsely identify the United States as a mediator who is seriously trying to bring the war to an end, and in particular to stop what they call the aggression on the Gaza Strip. I mean, you can hardly imagine a more unambiguous expression of the subservience of these particular governments to Washington. So what else is interesting about this? In paragraph 10 of the final communique, it is stated that the participating states, quote, reaffirm the necessity of confronting Israel's schemes to impose a new fait accompli in the region. But again, they offer no concrete action for confronting those schemes. Paragraph 15 calls for all states to impose sanctions on Israel, but the participants in this conference did not agree, at least as far as we can discern from the final communique, on any sanctions against Israel. And finally, in paragraph 16, the participating states welcome, as they put it, the adoption by the United Nations General Assembly a few days ago of the New York Declaration, which I mentioned at the outset of this report. What is the New York Declaration? Well, I'm putting up on the screen here a screenshot of the relevant page of the French Foreign Ministry. As you can see from the title, the New York Declaration emerged from a high-level international conference on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution on July 29th, 2025. Saudi Arabia and France presided over that conference. And my friends, that tells you pretty much all you need to know about whether the conference was likely to result in real action to protect the Palestinian people and to ensure respect for their rights. Now, to my mind, the most important aspect of the New York Declaration, there's a lot in there, and I'm not going to suggest there's nothing good in there. There are a lot of good things in there for the Palestinian people, although it didn't result in any, the New York Declaration didn't result in any of the signatories taking any new major additional action against Israel, at least not up until now. There are a lot of good things, but there's one thing that's particularly odious, and I'm going to show it to you now. This is paragraph 11 of the New York Declaration. I'll read it to you again in case you can't make out the lettering. Governance, law enforcement, and security across all Palestinian territory must lie solely with the Palestinian Authority, with appropriate international support. We welcome the one state, one government, one law, one gun policy of the Palestinian Authority and pledged our support to its implementation, including through the necessary DDR process that should be completed within an agreed mechanism with international partners and a set time frame. In the context of ending the war in Gaza, Hamas must end its rule in Gaza and hand over its weapons to the Palestinian Authority with international engagement and support in line with the objective of a sovereign and independent Palestinian state. Why is this, as I say, such an odious provision? Because, my friends, it totally disregards two things. The first is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to engage in armed resistance against their oppressor. And secondly, the popular will of the Palestinian people who are living under occupation. Let me deal with the first point. Some may say that because the weapons are not being handed over, would not be handed over to Israel or to an ally of Israel, but rather to the Palestinian Authority, that this wouldn't amount to a negation of the Palestinian right to armed resistance, because after all, the Palestinian Authority would be in possession of those weapons, in addition to those small arms that it already is permitted to possess. The problem with that logic, of course, is that the Palestinian Authority is a traitorous collaborator. And this is exactly what the Palestinian people have come to understand. I'm going to show you some polling numbers which reflect their view, the conclusion that so many of them have reached, that the Palestinian Authority is actually an instrument of the Israeli occupation and oppression of the Palestinian people. It certainly isn't engaged in any meaningful armed resistance against the occupation, and nor has the security forces under the command of Mahmoud Abbas ever been engaged in any meaningful armed resistance in occupied Palestine in the some 20 years or so that Abbas has been in power. So effectively, by compelling Hamas to turn its weapons over to the Palestinian Authority, you are requiring the Palestinian resistance groups to disarm. Hamas is, by all indications, the most effective force from an armed resistance perspective, and it has the most fighters and has inflicted the most casualties upon Israel's military of any of the resistance groups. Others are certainly making an invaluable contribution at great risk and sacrifice to themselves, but you are disarming the most, this is calling upon, this provision of the New York Declaration, the most effective fighting force that the Palestinian people in the occupied territories currently have. And you can be sure, based upon this idea of one government, one gun, that it's not just Hamas that is being called upon here and will be called upon if these governments have their way to disarm and to turn their weapons over to the Palestinian Authority. It's all the resistance groups in occupied Palestine. This is effectively a demand that the Palestinian resistance disarm, and it is therefore a frontal assault on their inalienable right under international law to engage in armed resistance to the oppression and now the genocide against the Palestinian people. So, as I said, it's not just that right which the New York Declaration flouts and disregards. It's also the popular will of the Palestinian people. In May of this year, the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research published its latest poll from the occupied Gaza Strip and the occupied West Bank. Actually, before I take you to those polls, I did omit to mention one other thing about the New York Declaration. And that other thing is that the New York Declaration endorses the two-state solution. Now, why is that problematic? Because, as I'm going to show you, that flouts the popular will of the Palestinian people. So, as I was saying, there was a poll done in the occupied territories in May of this year by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research. They asked a series of questions which they have been asking for years. This is a reputable polling firm, and they've compiled a great deal of data on public opinion in the occupied territories. The three key results of the May 2025 poll, which are fully consistent with prior polls going back several years, are these. One, a majority of Palestinians oppose the two-state solution. 2, a huge majority of Palestinians oppose the disarmament of Hamas. 3, a plurality of Palestinians believe that armed resistance is the best means of ending the occupation. And 4, Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority are deeply unpopular and much less popular than Hamas. So let's take a closer look at these polls, the results of this particular poll. First, and I put the relevant screenshot up on the screen here. What do Palestinians think of the two-state solution? Well, as you may be able to tell from this screenshot, in May of this year, 57% of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank collectively opposed a two-state solution on the 1967 borders, whereas only 40% supported it. And as the chart up on the screen shows, at no point since September 23 has this poll found that a majority of Palestinians living under occupation support the two-state solution. And since that time, since September 2023, the firm has polled Palestinians 6 times on that question. So the last 6 polls showed that a minority of the population opposed a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders. And it's important to point out here that a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders has never been on the table. Never has it been on the table in the decades-long negotiations between representatives of the Palestinian people and Israel. Israel never said, we are going to withdraw to the 1967 borders and give you all of that territory as part of the Palestinian state. They've always, and even the land that they offered wasn't accompanied their offer by meaningful guarantees of sovereignty. They wanted to control the borders. They wanted to control the airspace. They wanted to maintain some settlements within the occupied West Bank, which basically, would convert the occupied West Bank into a series of Bantustans, as Noam Chomsky often described them. So what was on the table was something that was a lot less than a truly sovereign state along the 1967 borders. And this poll is saying to the Palestinians, well, let's suppose the Israelis were willing to give you that, something they've never offered to give you. Well, a majority of the population says no. And yet the international community continues to try to stuff the two-state solution down the throat of the Palestinian people. And even if the Palestinian people wanted it, how exactly are they going to implement it now that there are some 800,000 illegal settlers spread throughout the West Bank, occupying, much of the choicest land, hilltops, strategically important hilltop communities, all throughout the West Bank? The settlers are heavily armed. They're extremely fanatical. They are prone to racist violence on a daily basis. What's the plan exactly for removing all of them from the West Bank? No one has put forward a remotely plausible plan. And what in effect has happened is that Israel, quite consciously and deliberately, with the support, not just the acquiescence, the support of Western states, has effectively and practically destroyed any realistic prospect of the two-state solution. Now, let's suppose that the Palestinians, a majority of them, decided that they wanted that, and that there was some means of accomplishing it, or something that might result in the creation of a truly sovereign Palestinian state along the 1967 borders. I myself, as an ardent supporter of the Palestinian people, I would readily accede to that. It's, after all, their country. It's up to them, in my view, whether or not they have a single state in which everybody, Jews, Palestinians, and others alike, have equal rights, encompassing the whole of historic Palestine, or whether they accept the state along the 1967 borders. That's their choice. And I would support whatever choice they make, at least if it has a support of the majority of the population of the people, the Palestinian people living under occupation. But these heads of state, from the Arab and Muslim summit, seem to think that it's their prerogative to shove this down the throat of the Palestinian people. And that so too is the whole concept of disarmament in violation of their right to defend themselves. And There's one other thing I want to say, by the way, about this this notion that's often bandied about by advocates for Israel, that if only the resistance groups in Gaza would disarm, then they would and turn over what the Israelis refer to as hostages. They're actually prisoners of war. Then the killing of Palestinians would cease, and the humanitarian aid would re-enter the Gaza Strip in sufficient quantities. I mean, if you believe that, I have some swampland in Florida to sell you. All you got to do is look at what is happening in the West Bank. And I myself saw that firsthand in March of last year when I went to the occupied West Bank and spent a significant amount of time in the refugee camps, particularly those of Jenin and Tulkarm, and saw on a daily basis the destruction and the terror and the atrocities that were being committed, and spoke to people who were being subjected to these crimes. Hamas is not in control of the West Bank. Hamas really wasn't even in control of any of these refugee camps. You know, there are images and videos and testimonials in abundance of unarmed Palestinians, farmers, workers, business persons, truck drivers being brutalized by the illegal Israeli settlers with the acquiescence and oftentimes the active assistance of the genocidal Israeli military. This has been going on. There are effectively pogroms going on in the West Bank on a daily basis against people who are unarmed and who have no affiliation with Hamas. So that is the destiny that awaits the Palestinian people in Gaza if they give up their weapons. Their best protection is their weapons, and that is exactly what they believe, according to the polls that have been done in the occupied territories recently. So let me show you one of those polls. This again is from May 2025 by the same research center. On the left of the screen, this is do you support or oppose the disarmament of Hamas in the Gaza Strip in order to stop the war on Gaza? And you'll see there the total across both the Gaza Strip and the occupied West Bank is 77% opposed, 77%. Only 18% support. So that's a ratio of about 4 to 1. 5% say they don't know or they did not answer. Interestingly, opposition to the disarmament of Hamas is highest in the West Bank. There it is an eye-watering 85%. And only 9% of people in the West Bank support the disarmament of Hamas. And then the next question on the right is this. This, again, is from the poll in May 2025. Do you support or oppose the expulsion of some Hamas military leaders from the Gaza Strip if this is a condition for stopping the war on Gaza? The total across both the Gaza Strip and the occupied West Bank was 65% were opposed. 31% were in support. So that's a ratio, obviously, of more than 2 to 1. And in the West Bank, again, the number was very high in opposition. 74% were opposed and 20% were in favor. And it is interesting that in the Gaza Strip, it was a close call. 51%, still a majority, were opposed and 47% were in favor. But I personally don't find that particularly surprising, because the people of the Gaza Strip are being subjected to a genocide, and they're being told over and over and over again by the Israelis and the so-called mediators, who are really just proxies of the Israelis at the end of the day, or in the case of the United States, is driving the Israeli bus. They're being told that the killing will stop if Hamas disarms, and it gives up control of the Gaza Strip. It's not difficult to imagine that Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, who are being subjected to the most unspeakable horrors on a daily basis, will be influenced to some degree by those assurances. and therefore may be inclined, much more than they would be in different circumstances, to support the disarmament of Hamas and the removal of Hamas from power in the Gaza Strip. But as I say, even in the Gaza Strip, a majority are opposed to the expulsion of some of Hamas military leaders. And this is just as some, it's not saying all. So they're opposed to the expulsion of even some Hamas military leaders. And again, you may dislike Hamas, you may be profoundly hostile towards Hamas, you may think that Hamas is the worst thing that ever happened to the Palestinian people. Ultimately, whatever your opinion may be, if you prioritize democracy, if you really respect the equality and the democratic rights of the Palestinian people, then you would not take it upon yourself, nor would these governments, to impose their views about Hamas on the Palestinian people. They would call on the Israelis, demand that the Israelis allow free and fair elections to take place. And if that happened, based upon these polls, there's a damn good chance that Hamas would win. And that's exactly what happened the last time, about 20 years ago, when Israel and its Western backers allowed free and fair elections in occupied Palestine. Hamas won them, and won them by a significant margin. Now, let's move on and look at some of the other results of this poll. As I mentioned, the New York Declaration calls for the Palestinian Authority, now led by Mahmoud Abbas, to rule over the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. According to the May 2025 poll in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, what do Palestinians think about the rule of Mahmoud Abbas? Well, as you may be able to see here, the Palestinian people were asked their views in a hypothetical situation where there is an election for the leadership of the Palestinian Authority, and there are three candidates on the ballot. And the three candidates are Marwan Barghouti of Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas of Fatah, and Khalid Mishal of Hamas. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, Marwan Barghouti is and has been languishing in an Israeli dungeon for, I think, more than 20 years now. You may recall that the psychopath Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security for the genocidal Israeli entity, visited Marwan Barghouti in his jail cell a few weeks ago in order to humiliate him and berate him, and then published video of him doing just that. Whether Marwan Barghouti is even capable at this stage, after the torture, psychological and physical, that he's undoubtedly endured over many years, is even capable of running and being an effective leader, is, I think, not known to anybody outside of his inner circle. Certainly, I don't profess to know that. But the Palestinian people were asked in this poll in May of this year to imagine the situation where he is both capable of running and free to run. And here's what the results showed. The results showed that the vote for Marwan Barghouti among the participants in the elections, the turnout would be 64%. It would be 50%, followed by Khalid Mashal at 35%. He would be, a distant second, but still more than a third of the popular vote. And Mahmoud Abbas would get 11%. 7 months ago, according to the pollsters, that would be, late 2024. Support for Marwan Barghouti among voters stood at 46%, and the Hamas candidate was almost at the same level at 44%, and Mahmoud Abbas was at 9%. And so this is the figure, this traitorous collaborator, whom the countries that voted for that UN General Assembly resolution that endorsed the New York Declaration, and the countries that participated in the two-day summit in Doha, this is the corrupt collaborator whom they want to impose upon the Palestinian people against the will of the overwhelming majority of the Palestinian people. And I want to show you one other aspect of this poll. This particular question was as follows. If only two candidates were in the competition for the presidency, Mahmoud Abbas of Fatah and Khalid Mishal of Hamas, what would you vote and for whom would you vote? So the poll found that 47%, so the turnout would drop from 64% to 47%. And among those who voted, Khalid Mishal would receive 68% of the vote and Abbas 25%. So Mishal would receive well over twice as much of the votes as Mahmoud Abbas. 7 months ago, only 24% among the actual voters chose Abbas, and 74% chose the Hamas candidate. So that would have been the poll taken in late 2024. So again, I don't think you could have a more dramatic demonstration of the fact that imposing Mahmoud Abbas on all the Palestinian people living under occupation would be a profound disregard and affront to the popular will of the Palestinian people. So, you know, if that is going to be the attitude of the governments in the Arab and Muslim world, and also those non-Arab and non-Muslim governments who supported the UN General Assembly resolution, which calls for this to happen, at least be honest with the world and stop talking about, you know, your support for the democratic will of the Palestinian people. Stop pretending that you regard them to be equals to others who have the right to vote and are free to choose whatever political party they feel best serves their interests and the interests of the community in which they happen to live. Stop pretending that you're pro-democracy and just be honest here. You're patriarchal, you have no regard for the popular will of the Palestinian people, and ultimately, you're not looking out for their best interests if you insist that they should disarm, and even worse, that Mahmoud Abbas, who has no democratic legitimacy, should be imposed upon them throughout the occupied territories. When you add it all up, the Doha summit constitutes yet another betrayal of the Palestinian people. But it's more than that. It's also a betrayal of the entire notion of Arab sovereignty, because it imposes no consequences on Israel for committing an act of war against Qatar, which has been very friendly to Israel for a very long time. In effect, the Doha summit has given a green light to Israel and its backer, Washington, to attack more Arab states, including states in the Gulf. If I were living in one of these states, I would be indignant about this, and I suspect that that's precisely how many of the people in these countries feel. The real question is, how long will they tolerate the betrayals of these puppets of Washington? Predictably, after the fiasco in Doha, the Trump regime is showing no sign that it will finally begin to respect the sovereignty of Arab and Muslim states. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, an unrepentant war criminal, was just asked about Israel's attack on Qatar on American television, and this is what he had to say.
He's unhappy with the Israeli surprise strike on Doha. You yourself said that it could derail future negotiations.
It was an Israeli decision, and the consequences are owned by Israel.
So Qatar is convening today this emergency session with its Gulf allies to come up with a response to those strikes.
I don't think it's a mystery that they're not happy about what happened. I think our message is irrespective of that, and that's one thing we need to separate that from the fact that no matter what, we still have Hamas, we still have hostages, and we still have a war.
Yeah, so in other words, the United States is going to continue with business as usual, and that includes a complete license to Israel to attack Hamas figures wherever they may be, whether it's Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt. That is basically the essential message here. Rubio is saying that we'll do whatever we have to do, no matter how unhappy they may be. And he said, you know, we have to separate the issue of the war, the so-called war in Gaza, from the unhappiness. No, they're inseparable, Mr. Rubio. And he knows that perfectly well. And at the end of the day, it is very clear that the Trump regime has no apparent intention of preventing these escalatory aggressions by the genocidal Israeli regime. And also, Rubio just flat out lied there. It was not simply an Israeli decision. It's an insult to our intelligence that the US government claims that Israel acted alone, when we know perfectly well that Israel, which is existentially dependent upon the US support, would not undertake so provocative an action against a state that hosts the largest US military base in the region. It wouldn't do that without the permission of its principal backer. As I say, it's existentially dependent on Washington's support. Last thing you want to do when you depend for your very survival on someone's support is piss that person off. So there's really no serious question as to whether Washington was consulted. And even if it wasn't consulted, it would have known before the warplanes arrived, because it has all of these military assets, radars, intelligence satellites in or above the region of West Asia. Inconceivable that Israeli warplanes, and I think the reports are in excess of 10 of them, flew all the way from occupied Palestine to Qatar without being detected by the Americans. So this is just a lie. But that's par for the course for the genocidal Trump regime. Finally, before I complete my report on the Doha summit, I want to revisit a question I raised right after Israel's attack on Qatar. As I just said, it's crystal clear to, I think, any fair-minded, rational observer that the United States knew in advance of and green-lighted this attack by Israel. But the position that I took, I went a step further immediately following the attack, and for a variety of reasons, which I won't repeat here, I argued that it was very likely that the Qatari regime itself knew in advance of the attack and did nothing to stop it. Well, yesterday on the Daniel Davis show, he's retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, if you don't know him, and he does have don't always agree with him, but he does have a very good program on YouTube. He interviewed, as he routinely does, retired U.S. Army Colonel Douglas Macgregor. And he went out of his way. He wasn't actually asked this question, but he went out of his way to make the same argument that the Qataris knew in advance of the attack on Doha and did nothing to stop it. And here's what retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor had to say.
I think you're going to hear an awful lot of crying and whining out of the Arab countries, but I don't see a whole heck of a lot of action from them at this point. And action is much more important than words. I would go one step further. I've checked with people I know who are in the defense industries who are involved in Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, and they both said to me categorically, if the Qataris had wanted to stop the Israelis, they could have done so. And I said, well, explain that. They said, because we've invested enormous quantities of materiel, radars, missiles, missile launchers, and so forth, lots and lots of training in Qatar. They have probably some of the finest air and missile defenses that exist anywhere in the world. It is simply impossible that Qatar could not have known the Israelis were coming. They would have identified that. And if they had identified it in advance, they would have said, you're violating our airspace. You can't do that. If you continue, we reserve the right to respond. Well, none of that happened. None of it happened, I think, because Qatar was well aware the Israelis were coming. And of course, we were as well. Nothing flies over that region of the world in the Arabian Peninsula, whether it's in the Euphrates River Valley in Iraq or further south over the Persian Gulf. We know exactly what's in the air at any given point in time. So we knew. Qatar knew. So all this whining about what the Israelis have done, I think, is more theater than reality.
The operative words, in case you didn't catch them, were simply impossible. Not even I went that far after the attack. I argued that it was very likely that the Qataris knew and did nothing to stop it. Colonel Macgregor, who is much better placed to talk about the military realities of the region than I am, he said that it's simply impossible that they didn't know. So Anybody who thinks that the Qataris are going to take meaningful action to defend the honor of their people and the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of their state, or even more than that, will take concrete action to defend the Palestinian people from a genocide when they won't even defend the sovereignty and honor of their own people, you're barking up a wrong tree. So with that, let me turn to something of a much more positive nature that happened yesterday. And as I mentioned at the outset, what happened yesterday was that a United Nations Commission of Inquiry that has been investigating Israel's genocide for months issued its report. And here you can see a very helpful report published yesterday by the Middle East Eye, describing or summarizing the findings of that report and talking about its significance. And if you have the opportunity, I suggest you read that article titled "Top UN Legal Investigators Conclude Israel is Guilty of Genocide in Gaza." And according to the commission, Israel has engaged in 4 acts of genocide. The Genocide Convention lists 5, explicitly identifies 5. So they didn't find the 5th, and I'm not going to get into it. It really is not pertinent for purposes of our discussion. But 4 of the 5 acts, and you don't have to commit all of the acts to be guilty of genocide. You only have to commit 1 category of the 5 categories of acts of genocide in order to be guilty of genocide. If you do it with the requisite intent, and I'm going to come back to that, and you only commit 1 category of act, that is enough to make you guilty of genocide, the crime of crimes. In Israel's case, the commission found it was 4 out of the 5. And what were those 4? Killing Palestinians, 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm. And the commission found that Palestinians suffered torture, rape, sexual assault, forced displacement, and severe mistreatment in detention, alongside widespread attacks on civilians and the environment. 3, inflicting conditions of life calculated to destroy the group, here the group being the Palestinian people of Gaza. The commission stated that Israel deliberately imposed inhumane living conditions in Gaza, including destruction of essential infrastructure, denial of medical care, forced displacement, blocking of food, water, fuel, and electricity, reproductive violence, and starvation as a method of warfare. Children were found to be particularly targeted, not simply affected, but targeted. And 4, preventing births within the group. And the commission found that the attack on Gaza's largest fertility clinic destroyed thousands of embryos, sperm samples, and eggs. Experts told the commission this would prevent thousands of Palestinian children from ever being born. The commission also found that genocidal intent was, quote, the only reasonable inference, close quote, that could be drawn based on the pattern of conduct of the Israeli authorities. And in support of that conclusion, it cited a number of statements from genocidal Israeli leaders, including the president, Isaac Herzog, who was warmly welcomed to London by British Prime Minister Keir Starmer only days ago. A member of the commission, Chris Sidoti, told Middle East Eye that states must act now to prevent genocide, and he added, there is no excuse now for not acting. That's all for now, my friends. I will be reporting in the days ahead on this particular report. We're going to have former UN human rights lawyer Craig Mohiber on our program later today. We'll probably publish his report tomorrow to discuss this report, also to discuss the Uniting for Peace resolution. He has a very interesting proposal to discuss. And I'm going to get Craig's views on the Doha summit as well. And we also expect to be able to interview in the next couple of days Leila Hamed, a Moroccan sports journalist who, as I understand it, is based in Spain. She has a large following on social media. And we're going to talk to her about the ways in which professional athletes, elite professional athletes, and world-renowned sports franchises have played politics and shirked their responsibility to speak out against the genocide of the Palestinian people. For now, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on September 17th, 2025.